Hi everyone, and welcome to the Hub and Spoken Special, a 6-part series where we have curated some of the awesome discussions we've had over the last 100 episodes. As data and analytics is really in its infancy, and so many people are trying to find their way still, we've always aimed to create a platform for us and our guests to open up and share real-life stories about delivering value from data, have frank and honest discussion about what works and what doesn't, and represent what we at Cynozure and the CDO Hub see as vital topics for organizations to engage in. So this special series celebrates and showcases those discussions, the amazing guests we've had, and the brilliant content we've shared. Each of the 6 episodes in this series focuses on a specific topic: data strategy or data management, business value, data platforms, data leadership, and finally, leading with purpose. It was incredibly hard to decide what to include from previous episodes, as there's been so many amazing things said by so many people. We hope, though, that we've represented this topic well and that it resonates with you all. This is part 5 of the series, the evolving role of the Chief Data Officer and data leadership. This is a topic that has been a mainstay of discussions on this podcast over the years. In fact, the first episode of Hub and Spoken was with Pete Williams, called The Role of the Chief Data Officer. And that episode continues to be the most listened to episode we have. In this episode, we look back at the conversations we've had with some of the industry's best up and coming and established leaders to explore what it takes to become a CDO, along with the demands and responsibilities of the role. We also touch on topics such as imposter syndrome as a blocker to high performance and what the C-suite care about when it comes to data. In this first clip, I spoke to industry veteran Andrew Day, who is Group Chief Data Officer at Pepper Financial Services Group, and previously the Chief Data Officer at Sainsbury's, News UK, and Telefonica UK. We were discussing what the C-suite needs from their CDO, and in this clip, we got onto the topic of making sure you focus on their business problems and work out how data can help. We also touch on how the C-suite understand, care, and are curious about data, and how best to prioritize the work that you do as a CDO.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and that is that the role, I think, of the chief data officer, or the most senior person that's involved in data or leading the data, the data charge in an organization. Their job is to take the business problems and work out how you answer them with data. So how do you build a product that's more profitable? How do we attract more customers? How do we make sure that our call center agents are being as efficient as they possibly could be? And I think the job of the data professionals is to almost act as the interpreter between the data that exists in the business or could exist in the business and the questions that are being asked by the most senior people in the organization.
And is there an element here that needs explaining at a board level, or actually generally people don't really care as long as we're supporting the business outcomes?
Yeah, I think that it always, most boards in my experience have a degree of curiosity as to how you're solving a problem using data. Do they need to know what modeling technique you're using or what data you've harnessed to solve the problem? Possibly not. Although some of them do have I've worked for chief execs who have a curiosity at that level of detail. But by and large, they're interested in how you can demonstrate that applying data in the way that you are applying data is going to result in a different outcome or a better outcome, either for customers or shareholders or employees.
Yeah, I mean, you paint a picture here actually, which is sort of slightly counter to some of the experiences that I've had around a senior level of understanding about where data can play its part, and often we find that an organization at all levels need to almost be convinced / sold to / explained quite specifically how data can support, or which business problems data can help, how data can help to support that, and the fact that it's worth investing in. You sort of paint a picture that is that's a given, and the job of the data professional is to make it happen, more of like a de facto.
Yeah, maybe I've kind of jumped ahead a little bit, because I think you're right that there needs to be a proving job, but the proving job is not in is data important, because I think people have taken that leap I think that they've got to the point where they recognize that, there's so much hype and noise about the way that data can help drive, better performing businesses, that they get that much. The question then is, if you believe that, then kind of show me the money.
Yeah. How does it apply to us?
How does it apply?
Situation?
Yeah, exactly. So somebody far brighter than me said some years ago, don't tell me what you want, tell me what you're trying to achieve. And if somebody can, in the business can articulate the problem, the outcome that they're looking for, I want to grow sales, I want to attract a different market segment, I want to reduce the amount of cost I have in my call centers, I want to, reduce call wait times for customers in call centers. If you can frame the problem, and recognize that problem can be solved through data and analytics, then that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where people get excited.
Yeah, and I, as I say, just to go back to my point, this is where I see a lot of data leaders, CDO or otherwise, sort of fall over a little bit, and that they don't, it's about capability and not necessarily about building capabilities, and not necessarily about those commercial outcomes, those commercial frameworks, those business things, those customers, those products that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And it can fall, the wheels can fall off a little bit sometimes when it hasn't been framed in that way.
Yeah, and I think building on that, you can create the most perfect data model. You can collect all the data from around the business and make sure that it's 99.999% accurate, available in seconds. But unless you're trying to do something with it, then it's irrelevant. And you can hire armies of data scientists and people with qualifications coming out there, but unless they're trying to solve genuinely value additive business problems, then there is no point. And unless you can get to the value quickly, then people will lose focus and faith, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's hard to prioritize the work as well, prioritize the investment, prioritize what people should be focused on. If you haven't said what things are we going to do, or what outcomes are we trying to get, it's a sort of a struggle to say we should do A over B if you don't know what impact A over B will have on what you're trying to achieve, and indeed whether it aligns to anything that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think I've always used 4 ways of prioritizing what the team work on, and those 4 axes are: is it going to deliver value to the business? And there's a kind of subtext there: how quickly is it going to deliver value to the business? The second is: do we have the data and skills available to do it? I.e., can we hit the ground running on that particular problem? The third is: do we have a business strategy, or does it fit with the business strategy? And the last one is: do we have a willing recipient of the outcomes? I.e., have we got somebody in the business that's willing to do something differently as a result of what the analysis tells them? And if the answer to all those things is yes, then that kind of helps you work out where you should spend your time and energies. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if there's something that can provide massive value, is strategically really important, but you don't have the data, then you should probably put that on the kind of parallel work stream, which is we're going to spend a year collecting the data and then we're going to be able to solve that problem.
Yeah.
But similarly, you need to be in a position where, in days and weeks, you're delivering value back that is recognized at the executive level as being, value. Because unless you get some early runs on the board, then it feels like a big cumbersome IT project as opposed to a value creating team.
Next in this data leadership episode, I return to my conversation with Cara Daly, who is the Chief Data Officer at Silicon Valley Bank, about the work of the CDO and the need to roll up your sleeves, get out there, build relationships, articulate your vision, build a strategy, a team, and get delivering. Cara points out you've got to hustle as a CDO. You can't lead from an ivory tower and hope the organization follows. It's a role that requires empathy, understanding, and influence to marshal all the elements to a successful outcome.
Well, I think, first of all, everybody was, very welcoming at SVB of the role, of the remit, but you had to carve it out. I had to carve it out kind of on my way in. And that leads to the 100-day topic. But I mean, I think most CDOs get this, is that you have to hustle for
Yeah.
every dollar, every seat at every table. This is a brand new function in the firm that you're coming into, and you really have to carve it out yourself. I do think we've made some massive progress, and we're now really starting to see the more traditional CDO remit come about, which is great. But we had to prove ourselves in the beginning, and that was really our work on transformation.
Yeah, I like the way you explain that, and I think a lot of data leaders that we talk to or recently in post don't expect or have experience of the hustle. And actually a lot of the roles don't end up working out because either some combination of the hustle isn't there, or some combination of it's not received coming back, and therefore budget isn't approved, and it gets a bit of a tiresome sort of treadmill. But I think you're right. There's a certain trait there, isn't there, to be able to just roll up your sleeves, hustle the hell out of this thing, get some cash, move the agenda forward, convince people it's the right thing to do, show people it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. The hustle is real. You are a founder. You are a co-founder in the data company inside your firm, and it's a new concept. You have to sell the why. You have to get business engagement. You got to get people to invest in you. So it is a hustle. I love it. I think it's thrilling. It's a roller coaster. But it's not for everybody. And I do understand the fatigue that CDOs get after 2 to 3 years, because it's nonstop. There are no huge wins on the CDO side. You'll just have like a lot of mini wins, and you have to get comfortable that those are the wins that fulfill you at the end of the day. But the big bang wins, they're just not there.
Yeah, and it's how you package up those small wins, because I think you can, the sum of those actually can be and should be quite large. So but it takes time, right? It takes time, sure.
And then you look back, and so you do have big wins, but I mean, for the most part, you have to celebrate all the incrementals, right?
Yeah, for sure. Now, let's go back then. So let's go to the journey you've been on, and look at sort of what you did when you arrived. What did that first? I mean, we've said 100 days, but just the first sort of initial period look like. What does the hustle look like in those first few months?
Well, I would say the first 100 days have to start before you land, right? You have to understand that when you were interviewing, there were problems said to you about the firm. So for me, when I was coming into the bank, I understood that there were challenges around business transformation, and that there was a lot of manual processes, there was a lot of paper shuffling and hand-holding of client information, not in any kind of automated or digitized way. So you have to really understand the problem statements going in. So that's really, and I also did my homework. I really did my homework on SVB. I talked to a lot of folks that I knew in my network around SVB and what their key challenges are. I tapped into some of the great partners that I've worked with in the past, as an example, EY, and got a understanding, what the lay of the land was. I would say the first 30 days of my role, I spent a lot of time, obviously, just getting to know everybody, getting to understand the immediate problems in front of us as it pertained to data and digital. And then, honestly, on my third day, I remember this, on my third day, I was in the Santa Clara office, and I didn't live in Santa Clara. I was flying back and forth from Portland, because I still lived in Portland. And I remember the third day, we were in the Kellogg auditorium, and we were doing a deep dive on transformation. And I was just sitting back, and there was a woman in the audience. And, I could feel like I wanted to solve the problem, because I could see they were struggling, and it was around data and master data and how do we handle. And I'm like, just hold back, don't solve it all for them. And so it's hard in the beginning, because you want to tell them the answer to the story, because CDOs, I think we've seen this movie 400 times, right? And we just see it at different places, but it's the same movie. Yeah. But I remember her saying, she's like, "Go girl, tell us how we can solve this problem." So, I think it's important that you meet people and you get to know them, and it's good to like have them come to some of the conclusions. But I think they've hired a CDO to come in and solve some of these problems. So speak up early days. That's my advice. I spoke up in that meeting, and from there it was just really fast out of the gate, right? We moved rather quickly. But that was kind of my first week, my first impression.
In many organizations, it's still very early days in the understanding of data, how it can play a part, and why traditional methods of using data don't deliver as much value as they could. Ashley Brinegar, the Chief Data Officer at PCC Metals, is the first CDO at her organization and had a focus on helping the business to understand the potential that data provides, why it's important, and how they will go about defining and delivering a data strategy. We joined the conversation when we got talking about the need to use language and analogies of the business and avoid losing people with jargon from the data industry.
So what I settled on, and I found when you go into a manufacturing space or you're talking to an organization that doesn't have the background in data, you can overwhelm them with all of the things in data. So understanding data lineage, the 7 different dimensions of data quality. People have never heard of that before. They just say, I want it 100% right. And so you almost paralyze them by overwhelming them with a language they're not familiar with.
Yeah.
So for me, when I wrote the data strategy for TimeOut, I wrote it in manufacturing language. And so I drew analogies between, like you would set up a plant, you're going to think about what capacity do you need in a plant? What is the flow of the material through? What resources do you need? What kind of equipment and capacity do you think about? How do you schedule lead times? What is the value of transformation of a product you have through a plant, and how do you manage your product through its life cycle? This is natural manufacturing thinking, and it's the same for data. I have to think about what infrastructure do I have to support the flow of my data? What capacity do I need? How do I manage that product through? What is all the value transformation I'm putting on the data as I go through? And how do I control it with regulations and quality, just like the FAA controls our product for aerospace? It's no different in terms of GDPR, California's protection rights, and so forth. So by doing that and putting in that language, I've got a better response. And so when somebody says, "Oh, why are you asking me what I'm trying to do with it?" I kind of talk through, well, depending on what you're trying to do with how we design or these types of things, I think about how I design the data to give it to you, or what things I need to pull in to connect that you may not think about previously. Because if I think about connecting data that was previously in a silo, maybe I'm going to discern a different insight and so forth. So that parallel between what people are naturally doing in manufacturing has been super advantageous as we introduce the language of data at TimeOut.
That's the analogies, storytelling is this, sort of storytelling part that I like the idea of analogies. You can almost picture a product being made through your manufacturing process and you can align, you can draw the picture in the same way that data moves through, a pipeline and through a plant and out the other end, you get a finished product. Do you have that concept of product management and treating data as a product in that way? Because there's some good analogies with manufacturing like that.
You're right. We are trying to introduce that as treating a data like a product, and one for the organization to understand that you can continuously add features and value as you learn, just like you would your iPhone. It's very easy to pick your iPhone up and say, you have different versions of your iPhone and you're getting different value each time they release a version. Similarly, these analytics, as I pull more data in and connect things that wasn't previously connected, I'm adding further value to this one product. And so I want them to start thinking about, one, how do I scope my work in a manner that is of this manner, right? So I'm never really done, but I'm going to add subsequent features. And yeah, so we're starting to introduce that. One, how we scope, and then how the organization can expect to see data products as they come through. And it makes them think about it differently. It's more of just a report. Yeah. What am I trying to use this for, and how can I use this as a product as opposed to just some report I look at once a year.
Yeah, I guess there's just on your analogies point as well, for data as a product, there's a good analogy of, you don't just create a new product for an airline, you prototype it with, and excuse my ignorance, but in plastics maybe first, you've got a CAD drawing, and then in plastics, and then eventually once you've iterated enough and you're comfortable with it, you then create it as an end product that you ship to market. And I think that's what you're saying there with how you treat data as a product is that concept of you don't need to deliver the gold-plated solution first. You need to get it right enough and then iterate it.
That's right. And they have never done this before. So I use this analogy of full cake slice, or if you Google Agile, you'll see schematics of what does a pilot really look like. If I want to go from A to B, I'm not going to build a wheel. Maybe I build a skateboard, and then I, add a handle on, and I have a scooter and so forth. Yeah. Kind of in that thought process, I'm asking my team, if you're building a visualization, build it how it might look. Don't worry about how the data is connected underneath, or if the data is right. Get it on the screen to say, would you like it in this manner? If I could make the data look like this, or if I connected this type of thing, where would you like this placed? Or what questions are you trying to answer, in what order? And build a hierarchy and get feedback of how people are interacting with things. Then we'll worry about connecting the data on the second sprint, or whatever the case may be. And is this the right thing? Or, and problem solve that way, and do it in this incremental fashion, because this old approach of I'll gather all the requirements anybody could ever want, I'm going to go off and build something in my silo. Inevitably, especially with COVID, the environment is changing so quickly that I'm never going to be on the right side of what the customer is asking for, because I've taken it, but their environment is changing too rapidly. Yeah. So
the CDO role is a senior business leadership position, and those that succeed really are considered high achievers. I learned in my discussion with imposter syndrome specialist Tara Halliday that imposter syndrome impacts 70% of high achievers. As aspiring or actual high achievers, CDOs run the risk of suffering with this syndrome, and having suffered with it myself, and having spent time with so many others that also suffer from it, I felt this episode was right to return it to this episode and to shine a light on it once again.
Imposter syndrome, just to define it, is the secret feeling of being a fraud when you're not, and the feeling of being not quite good enough, and the fear of being found out. And yeah, it affects 70% of high achievers at some point in their career, and that's men and women equally. There's no difference between the gender in that. And it creates anxiety, confusion, isolation, stress, and overwhelm. And it can even lead to people having burnout and leaving a career. So it's a significant hindrance to high performance and really getting the very best out of yourself.
It's I think the sort of impact on high performance is the focus I'd quite like to have on this discussion. But is it just, you mentioned both high performance and high achievers there. Is it just high achievers that this impacts, or is that really just the focus of your sort of specialism, if you like?
High achievers notice it because they are competent and capable, so that they recognize that intellectually, they know that. Yeah. And they've got proof of their success, but internally they're not feeling it. They're feeling like they're not quite good enough, and that gap becomes really obvious when people are striving for higher levels of achievement.
Fine. So that I understand that. So it because you are achieving good things, as you say, intellectually you understand that you probably do have some capability. You must be good at something because you've got to a position of high achievement and high performance. But it's that feeling that I think fraud is the word you used. It's that feeling that actually you're not as good as the status you've sort of got yourself into. I imagine that is prevalent in people that that are early career as well, that are good, an expert at something, but haven't yet sort of reached the levels of high achievement, high performance.
It comes and goes. So it comes and goes with situations of high challenge and low support. That's one particular trigger. And if you step into a new role, that can often be one of the triggers. But if you imagine the belief that drives imposter syndrome is sitting there in the background pretty much the whole time, just getting triggered from time to time. It gets triggered most commonly by situations of high challenge and low support.
Yeah.
Challenge is interesting because some challenge is great, that's what stretches us. It's the fun part, but some challenge, when it's too much, becomes then something that will trigger imposter syndrome. So one thing particularly in terms of challenges, if you have a toxic work environment. So check it out and see what you can do in terms of the toxic work environment. That's very important. And the other thing is that a low level of support. So get some support, and that support is not just somebody to talk to about things, but it can be practical things, or your getting someone else to mow your lawn, for example, get a gardener in to take that. So because the stress is cumulative, it will just help calm down the sensitivity of the amygdala, so it's less likely to get triggered.
Right. Well, that is great advice, and I can see where that can certainly help me in a few situations. Great. Well, I it's fascinating stuff, and it's interesting because I think there's two for an individual listening. I think there's their own imposter syndrome, if indeed they have it, and recognizing it in themselves. And then there's recognizing it in others. So, a lot of people are managing teams, managing people, and they're either very senior or sort of an early manager who's got, maybe one or two people. Is there ways, so we talked about identifying in yourself, and I think obviously it's a lot of the identifying yourself is feeling. It's quite hard to see feelings in other people, but is there a way you can, if we think about identifying it with people who are managing teams and seeing people in their teams, the kind of signs that they may have? So if we're looking at other people rather than yourself, in terms of imposter syndrome.
You might see it, but people with imposter syndrome tend to keep it a secret because they think it's a personal flaw. So I'd say you would be amazed at the people who have imposter syndrome and nobody can tell. They appear competent, confident, nothing can impact them. And actually, like the swans swimming, they're graceful and smooth on the surface, and the feet are paddling
underneath,
and you simply cannot tell. However, what you can do is you can create an environment for your team that makes sure that it's as positive and supportive as possible. Not necessarily praise, but something, so you can have a high performance, high octane work environment and still have that level of respect. The opposite of the imposter syndrome belief about our worth is self-acceptance. If we accept ourselves, then what people say or think about us doesn't affect us. So that's where you're going. So the more you can accept people and give them, plenty of training, don't expect them to do everything all by themselves. All these kind of things can just help foster a really nurturing work environment that will then get the very, very best out of them.
In this final part of this data leadership episode, I talked to my friend and now my colleague, Jennifer Agnes, just after she had finished as the Chief Data Officer at Schneider Electric and someone who had held senior leadership positions prior to that at Credit Suisse and GE. Jennifer is a strong advocate for helping to develop the craft of data leadership, and that collaboration, building relationships and peer mentoring is a strong way to achieve personal career potential. We talk about that in this clip and discuss the formal and informal approaches to improving the quality of data leadership. What do you think are the important things we should be doing to raise up, level up the capabilities and qualities of data leadership in organizations?
So I think there's the formal part of it, which is how you train and the curriculum that your kids follow and the students and learners all over the world are going to follow. in terms of how important data is and analytics and data science and decision making using really good data. That's sort of the formal part, and you can follow these curriculum not as a data person, but just as of learning, right?
Yeah.
And you just want to learn about AI, or you want to learn about natural language processing. This is just curiousness, and they can keep learning that way, and so do I. But the informal part, I think, is where we have a lot of opportunity, because, and it's like the CDO hub that you guys started in the UK, and what I'm picking up here in the US, is this community of chief data officers, or people who really care about data, need to find other people, usually often outside of their existing organization, have conversations with, to keep exploring and keep trying to share best practices, because we keep bumping into these same problems at different levels of maturity in your role or in your organization. Yeah. So the mix that we have, I think, on the US CDO hub that we just kicked off, there's somebody on there who it's the first time they've ever worked as a chief data officer. So questions and conversations and very open and constructive conversations about problems they're facing or where they could use help, those off the record conversations, the real hard conversations about what works, what doesn't work, keeps happening. And that creates this link and this network of people who care. And I think that's what we're trying to build. And I think that's where the informal relationships are so important as you move into a data role. It's a very lonely role, the chief data officer in an organization, especially if you're the first one and you're trying to build it. I find it to be a very lonely, I don't know if you had that, if you've seen that, but I feel like it's a very lonely role.
I think it is. And I was just thinking about that as you were sort of talking about the collaboration there, because the expectations can be really high, from the board peers or the organization or conversely very, very low, to be fair, but that's often really high where, let's bring in, even if it's just bringing a load of data scientists actually, but the expectations for data, because of the noise in the market and the industry and what's talked about in sort of mainstream press and industry news and stuff, is that data's going to solve everything. And because of our passion for it, we inadvertently do that as well, I think. So that the expectations can be really high. So because of that, when you go into an organization, I think, you kind of feel like, and rightly, you have to perform. And if you're new into the role, or even if it's new into an industry you don't know, you don't really have anyone to reach out to, particularly internally. So I think you're right, that the loneliness can be alleviated by an informal network.
I've experienced, people who've been in different industries, who've done it for, a short time or a long time, and who are open to helping, right? And not just a pitch out, not, let me show you and tell you what to do, not a one-sided conversation. It's really much more collaborative and cooperative in terms of
genuine dialogue.
Yeah. And no one's judging, and, you can ask a stupid question because you got a stupid question, and it's kind of okay. So that's why I think it's the formal stuff, because I do think the world is changing in terms of what people can learn every day. I mean, look at today, like we work from home, all the courses are online, all the conferences are online, lots of them are free. So if you're inquisitive and curious, you can hook up and learn about all that in a more formal way. But the interaction and the networking and these little teams that we can create to have real conversations about what's working and not are much more genuine. And I think it also builds the relationship, right? Because it's all about building relationships too, because you can go in and be the best chief data officer in the world, but if you can't relate to the people around you, it's not going to be fun either for them or for you.
I clearly agree that, and the disclaimer probably should have said that obviously we run this network of data leaders, and you in the US now, and I think that's a great growing network across the US. But that aside, there is a lot of community work, by the vendors, by other organizations, by I see some great stuff being done internally within organizations to create understanding and clarity about what data can do in an organization. So wherever that collaboration happens, wherever that education networking happens, whether that's at an industry level across data leaders or internally within a company to educate, and arguably that learning is even more important, isn't it? The internal education about not what data leadership is, but what outcomes you can achieve by applying data to problems. And I think that's the exciting bit for me, is how do you take all of this stuff and apply it really, really well? And data leadership has a role in helping make that happen. The topic of the Chief Data Officer and data leadership in general is very close to my heart. I'm honoured and lucky to get to spend time with so many brilliant people in these roles and learn from all these great people. Through my company Cynozure, I get to provide this kind of expertise and thinking to our clients, and through our members club, the CDO Hub, provide a platform that raises the bar on what good leadership looks like and acts as a personal growth accelerator for individuals in this space. The Chief Data Officer role is here to stay, is growing in prevalence, and those that can be successful are a real game changer for organizations. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Hub and Spoken special series. I want to thank all our guests in the episodes curated on this edition and all other editions for their contribution to making this podcast so valuable and sharing their stories. I also want to thank our wonderful listeners across 126 countries and counting for listening, feeding back and sharing these episodes with other people to enjoy. We hope you find this series interesting, inspiring and informative, so please do check out the rest of the series.